In the dead of the night, when the world falls silent, something sleeps in the darkness. The Romanians call it morta territory, or creeping death. A nightmare with claws like jagged knives, soaked in blood, dragging its grotesque, misshapen body across the earth. They warn that you'll hear it before you see it. The scrape, the crunch, the slow agonizing pull towards its next victim. And when it catches you, there's no escape. When it finds you, there's no running, no fighting. Just a slow, inescapable pull toward your fate. An evil shadow closing in. A whisper too late, a scream cut short. Welcome back to Project Black Garden, a Monsters and Myths podcast. This is Season 1, the Oleander Files, Episode 3, File Number 187. The gruesome and unbelievable Klikshaw. My name is Michael. Are you ready to begin? Deep within the forests of Romania, nestled in the cursed Raven Valley, there's an ancient horror, something so feared that even the bravest shepherds refused to set foot beyond the crumbling stones of their old boundary markers. The elders whispered its name only in hushed voices. Morta territory, or the creeping death. Its legend dates back to a time before Vlad the Impaler. Some say it was once a man, a warrior, a noble, or perhaps even a monster in human skin. But most claim it was never human at all, but something older, something that should have remained buried beneath the old Romanian soil. Now, this monster gets its name, Klikshaw, from the sound it makes while it's chasing you. Photographic and physical evidence of this creature is almost non-existent, but it has been described as 6 to 7 feet tall, with a humanoid face that looks like it's always screaming. It's covered in shadow, which hides most of its details. It's long and lanky, broken even, with long spindly arms, with giant hands, and long knife-like claws at the end of each fingertip. It's said that it has no hind legs or tail, almost as if its torso was broken in half or pulled apart. Now this monster, once awakened, uses those long arms and giant claws to scrape at the ground and pull itself forward, burying its deep claws into whatever's in front of it with an awful, sickening click, and then slowly dragging itself, pulling it closer to its prey, causing a sound that's so frightening and so revolting that it can be best described by the sound of rotting flesh being dragged along the ground. Shaw. No one knows when the name Creeping Death fell out of favor for the now infamous Klikshaw, but knowing that this nightmare of a story has been passed down from generation to generation, it's easy to see why. Its main characteristic of hunting would be the easiest way to refer to this nightmare. Klikshaw. Now, the story of Klikshaw seems to be held in regards as an old Romanian ghost tale. But ask any Romanian grandmother, and she will tell you otherwise. No one knows what evil Klikshaw was born from, they just know it was always there. It is written that it might have originated from a long, lost, cursed valley of petrified forest located in the haunted hills of Romania, where an old, ancient, withered, blackened tree that was embedded inside what looks like a prehistoric meteorite crater, frozen in the center, surrounded by nothing but scorched earth and dead wilderness. Now it's said that some poor soul traveled to that lone tree, brokenhearted by the death of a newborn infant. Now some say this person was so distraught that they went there to kill themselves at the base of the tree and had slit their wrists and waited to die. Others say this person was there praying for relief from the pain of losing their infant and accidentally cut open one of their hands on one of the withered branches. Either way, when this person's blood hit the ground, something changed. Something awakened. An evil so old and so sinister that people said, if you see it, you're already dead. Now the Klikshaw needs blood to awaken. It doesn't matter whose blood or what blood. But when it tastes that blood, it pulls itself from its dirt tomb, focused only on finding the person or creature who has temporarily satiated its evil thirst, and then quickly begins to stalk that prey forever. The Klikshaw never stops until it gets its victim. And once it has, it scratches itself back into the earth, falls silent and still, and waits for its next victim. Now the stories say that the creature moves slow but methodical, giving you a false sense of hope that you will survive its wrath. Some of the stories have said that after awakening, the victim got away easily until the next morning when they were awakened by being torn to shreds, as Klikshaw had caught up with him. No matter where you go, where you hide, where you run to, it finds you. Whether it takes an hour or a decade, it never stops. Now, when I was looking into my great uncle's file, he had a few examples from the past. Like, for instance, in the late 1800s, a butcher named Elias Holloway owned a shop on the outskirts of town. He was known for his fine cuts of meat, but also for his temper. One night, after a violent argument with his wife, Elias was seen dragging a sack of something heavy out into the woods. The next day, his wife was gone. A week later, Elias stumbled into town, babbling incoherently. His hands were torn open, his face gaunt, his breath shallow. He spoke of something coming from the dirt, of claws pulling through the ground, of a shadow that chased him through the night, but would not stop. He was said to be rambling uncontrollably. They put it there. They buried it. They thought it would sleep forever. But it doesn't sleep. It's coming. I can hear it. Click, click, Klikshaw, Klikshaw. No one believed him. He was later hung for the murder of his wife. But after his execution, the town blacksmith found something in the woods near Elias's home. Deep, impossible claw marks carved into the stone beneath the trees. Beside them, a trail of something that looked very much like dragged footprints. Another story, in 1932, around the time of the Great Depression, a group of miners worked an abandoned coal shafts near the forest's edge. One of them, a man named Jedediah, found something strange beneath the rock. A chamber sealed away, its walls covered in carvings too old to decipher. Ignoring the warnings of his fellow workers, Jedediah took a pickaxe to the seal, and in doing so gashed his palm on the jagged stone. Blood splattered everywhere. As he rested his pickaxe against the now split stone, he was unaware of just how bad he was bleeding. And before he knew what was happening, a giant black pair of clawed arms ripped from the crack in the stones. The other miners ran, but Jebediah had no time. And one of the witnesses says he was torn to pieces as quickly as he had split that rock open. Now, by the time any rescuers had arrived, they found only the remnants of his shredded clothing and a stream of blood pouring into the stone. The other miners were inconsolable and insisted of what they had seen. But the rescuers could find no stone covered in blood. But instead, they found a small 3-foot dead tree with only a handful of limbs sticking from the rock. The other miners insisted that was not there. The next day, the mine was closed forever. Now, in my uncle's journals, these handful of stories reminded him of a deadly weekend my father had mentioned to him. Now, my father never told me about this story. And once you hear it, you'll understand why. Because it sounds crazy. It was 1974, and my father, with 2 of his friends, were invited by some local students at the University of Illinois. It was my father, his college roommate Mark, and Mark's girlfriend Lisa. Now, there had been stories about a rumored, cursed, petrified tree on the back hills of one of their local mountains. My father and his roommate Mark, knowing a handful of college students at this university, they reached out and were quickly invited to go for a camp out and let's test this theory. Now, this challenge, I think, was just a cover up for young college students to go into the wilderness and party, because they brought plenty of alcohol, loud music, sleeping bags, and a decadent spirit. Armed with flashlights, a camera, but no weapons, they ventured in the old forest, where the claw marks were rumored to be carved into the rocks. They laughed, they joked, and eventually they dared each other to spill a drop of blood on the ground. Lisa, trying to be the bravest, nicked her finger first with a pocket knife that she had brought. She deliberately placed her bleeding finger, dragging it along the scratch marks on the ground, and she waited, holding her breath. Nothing happened. Quietly disappointed, the group of college students continued the night's festivities, setting up camp, dancing and singing around the fire, drinking, having sex, and enjoying the stars in the sky. The next morning, my father was wakened by a disturbing but unfamiliar sound. He said it sounded like the echo of a pickaxe hitting rock, and then the sound of if you were dragging a large garbage bag across the floor of the forest. Brush being swept aside, scraping, old twigs snapping. He cleared the crust from his eyes, looked around as dawn approached, and saw a lumbering shadow just off in the distance, right outside the tent of Lisa and Mark. He called to the ghastly shadow, but it didn't move. He took a step closer, realizing that this person may not be a person. He called again, threatening it to leave, but it didn't. Instead, the shadow raised a menacing arm into the air, and he said it looked like it was holding a half dozen butcher knives in its hand. He quickly called out to Lisa and Mark, who seemed to wrestle awake inside the tent. Just then, the shadowed creature's arm swung down, slicing open the front of their tent, ripping it to shreds. Now, my father was always a react first, ask questions later kind of guy. He immediately grabbed the keys to his vehicle, jumped into it, started it up in a matter of 10 seconds, slammed it into gear, and drove it directly towards Lisa and Mark's tent. Now, he was sure this person or creature would run, but instead, as he approached it, honking the horn wildly, it stood up on both arms, turning towards him. He could not make out anything on its face. No features, not even eyes. But he swore it didn't have a lower half. No legs, no tail, nothing. In a split second, before his bumper made contact with the creature, it moved. Without hesitation, my dad swung the door open, called for Lisa and Mark. They jumped into the car. He threw it in reverse, spun around, not worried about any of their belongings, and furiously drove out of there. The other college students quickly followed, not even knowing what was going on. Now, my uncle said that my dad and his friends pulled over the side of the road, tried to comprehend what just had happened, when Lisa said, "Do you think the stories are true?" Mark and my dad looked at each other, put the car back in gear, and drove home. Now, for the next month, they never discussed what happened. They never even talked to the other college students that they were there with. They didn't think anybody would believe them anyways. When one afternoon, Mark reached out to my dad and said Lisa wasn't sleeping good at night anymore. He mentioned that she'd been hearing things, disturbing things, but the night before, they had seen it again, right outside their apartment they shared together. My dad asked, "Well, what did you guys do?" He said they grabbed everything they could, hopped in the car, and they went to Lisa's parents' house. And that's where he was calling from. My father asked if there was anything he could do, and he said, "No, I just needed to tell somebody because I feel like we're losing our minds." My dad asked, "Was it the creature?" Mark took a moment, sighed, and said, "I think so." And before my father could say anything else, he heard Lisa in the background. She started to scream, "It's here. I can hear it. Oh my God, it found us. It found me." Mark tried to calm her over the phone, and my father could only listen. But my father said, within a matter of seconds, he heard the shuffling of people panicking, and then the thud and the crash, as if something or someone had broken down their front door. Screams filled the phone, and my father said his stomach rolled over with the sickening thought that Klikshaw was real, and it had come for Lisa. And moments before the phone went dead, Mark screamed, "Lisa, run!" And then he called to my dad. "Call the police. Hurry. I don't think we can stop it." The line went dead. My father drove over to Lisa's parents' house as quickly as he could. And when he got there, Mark and his parents were in shock, covered in blood. Only pieces of Lisa were left, and they were scattered throughout the living room and their front yard. My father made eye contact with Mark, and neither one of them could say anything. But Mark, trembling and crying, lifted one arm, pointed to the edge of the property, and started screaming. My father turned around to find a shriveled black tree stump with 2 tree limbs pointing directly into the air. Now, the ground around the stump, everything looked dead. No grass, no weeds, nothing. But at the base of this tree were long, defined scratch marks, as if something was pulled below it. My father went and consoled Mark and Lisa's parents, and they never discussed this again. Now, according to my great-uncle's journals, he personally went to the location that Lisa perished, and there was no longer a tree stump there. But now, there was a large weeping willow tree that stood 20 feet tall. He took a picture of it because it didn't look right. It didn't look healthy. Its limbs, leaves, discolored. He said the tree limbs hung almost like they were dead. They didn't blow in the wind. There were no birds or wildlife anywhere near this tree. It stood centered in a patch of dirt, 30 yards across. No grass, no weeds, nothing. It almost seemed like the soil was dead. My great uncle Sam approached the tree cautiously, and he said as he got closer, it had a weird smell to it, almost metallic, iron-like. It only took him a moment to realize it smelled like blood. He took a moment, then took a few more pictures, and then wrote down in his journal the last known location of creeping death, Klikshaw. Now, since finding my great uncle's journals and learning of this possible nightmare, I've tried to find any more examples or stories of this beast. And I'm convinced there are many more victims out there. In Maine, from the 90s, a story in Portugal from a decade ago, and a possible connection to a famous mass murder in a dusty old town in the center of Mexico. But those are stories for another time. All right, listeners, we're only 3 episodes into this podcast, and things are starting to get really weird. I told you I'd keep you updated on any of the strange occurrences or events that seem to be happening. Now, I've spent the last few weeks in my head wondering if what I think is happening. But now I know it is happening. Anybody who listened to the last episode knows that I had started to see an unmarked gray van just popping up randomly wherever I was at, and found it parked just outside my house and kind of catty-corner to my neighbor's house. Now, obviously, with what I've been doing in this podcast, it puts a target on me. And it's easy to get caught up in, oh, I'm being watched. They're listening now. But after what happened this past weekend, I think I am. So for a little context, here's what happened. I was doing my usual routine, going to the grocery store, getting some overpriced groceries. And you know that feeling when you think somebody's behind you, which is a weird thing to have inside a grocery store, because it usually means you're being hit on or stalked, or you're in somebody's way who's trying to get to that bottle of ketchup. Well, any aisle I'd go down, I felt like I was being watched and followed. I gave a few grumpy old ladies the evil eye, thinking, are you following me? And just when I got fed up with myself for overreacting to normal people, a man in a blue jacket with a hoodie that he had pulled up over his head in the store was at the end of one aisle. Now, he quickly grabbed some random jar of jelly or jam to act like he was shopping for something. But the second I would turn away from him, he would immediately put the item back and continue to walk my way. Now, that doesn't prove anything. But after the fourth time it happened, it was pretty obvious. Now, that doesn't mean it's some government official or the men in black or something nefarious. But due to the fact that I'm doing this podcast under a fake name, I shouldn't be famous and people shouldn't be following me to get a selfie. I made my way through the store, hurried up, self-checked myself out, and made a mad dash for my vehicle. As I was pulling out, I thought I'd successfully avoided this new pair of eyes because I didn't see him anymore. But as I pulled out of the parking lot onto the main road, 2 cars behind me was that very van that's been following me. This was in midday, so it made it easier to see inside everybody's vehicles as you're driving down the road. But there was just enough glare that I couldn't make out who was behind the wheel of that van. And honestly, at that point, I didn't want to know. I just wanted to get home safe. And there lied the problem. I don't think I would have been safe at home. And I decided, screw it, let's go home. If it's the van, it already knows where I live anyways. And just then, that van cut me off and pulled into a parking lot of one of our local post offices and then didn't park. It drove as slow as possible between the parking spaces, almost daring me to follow it. So I did. I pulled in as quickly as I could, slammed my car in park directly in front of the main entrance doors. And yes, I might have parked in a handicap spot. The van backed itself in to the final parking spot. Growing more frustrated, I quickly jumped out of my car, ready to run over to that van. But as soon as I got to the front of my car, common sense stopped me. I looked over, and now I could see who was driving the van. And it was the same man wearing the blue hoodie. He still had the hood over his head and tightly snug to his face. He didn't move. And in that moment, my anger fell away as fear engulfed me. So the only thing I could think of in that moment was, maybe I could use some stamps. So I proceeded inside, got into the much larger line than I was expecting, and waited for him to leave. 15 minutes later, I was at the front of the line buying a booklet of stamps that I didn't need, and I readied myself for what was next. I made my way through the post office, back out the front doors. The sun was high in the sky and immediately blinded me for a couple seconds. As my eyesight fell back to normal, I turned toward the parking spot, waiting to see that stranger inside the van, still not moving, but staring at me. But now, it was gone. I walked to the end of the building, finding nothing but growing worried. Made my way through the parking lot just to make sure he hadn't moved. He was nowhere to be seen. With relief and now confusion, I stumbled my way back to my car. Quickly, I unlocked it, slid into the front seat, tossed my fancy new Disney stamps onto the dash of my car, and let out a sigh of relief. And for a brief moment there, I thought to myself, this could all still just be coincidence. It could be a mistaken identity. It could have nothing to do with the secret journals that my great Uncle Sam left me. And that's when something caught my eye. I looked down in the passenger seat, and that's when I saw a long purple flower of some kind. It had been clipped just at the base, where the petals start. It was about 8 inches long, and looked familiar. That's when it hit me that all my doors had been locked. How did he get in here? And why was this strange man leaving me flowers? I grabbed my phone, took a picture of it, highlighted it, and did a quick internet search and discovered that it was wolfsbane. Now, I didn't know anything about wolfsbane, so I immediately looked up what wolfsbane is used for. And the first thing that popped up was wolfsbane symbolizes danger and evil. As a plant, it's poisonous to humans and was used historically to make weapons more deadly, creating an obvious link to death and danger. The perfect gift for a podcaster who is spilling the details about government secrets and the things that go bump in the night. Another deadly flower for the Black Garden. So, what do I do now? Do I stop? Do I take this obvious threat and pick up all my toys and go home and just be secure in the fact that my father and his uncle believed enough in me to share his secrets with me? No, I don't think so. We're just getting started. But I think it's time I double down on what I'm doing here. So I've decided I'm gonna lean into the social media even more. I'm gonna look into my options, but I will definitely be starting a Blue Sky or possibly a Twitter account. I know, it's not called Twitter anymore, but I'm old school. So look for me on Twitter. And I'm going to document this as it happens. If I can get enough of you on board to following the story and share my story, I truly believe there's safety in numbers. So look me up, Gardener Michael, on your social accounts. And I'll do my best to keep you guys informed. And also, keep the emails coming and the messages. I love hearing about your guys' experiences, especially the ones that you've been told people don't want to hear about. Like Justin and his Bigfoot sighting. I feel honored that you trusted me with your experience. We have to stick together in this. So email me at pbgharvest@gmail.com or message me on any of my socials. As for what's coming up next, many of you will have heard of this one. Join us next time for one of the ultimate boogeymen, the infamous Mothman. As always, I'm Michael. And remember, monsters are real. And sometimes they come straight from your nightmares.